Recall. That's the one.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Morning.
Hey.
Zero, right?
Yes.
Yes, took the Yolanda yesterday. Have you done this before?
Twice.
Okay, so you know it.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because, normally like with the comm team and everything, since we're just using this thing, we really don't have much that we're involved with, so.
Okay, so you're with the comm team. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I know she emailed you the last time also.
Yeah.
But,
and it's all good, because the thing is I mean, most of the time anyway, it's like, IT, like the idea is like IT might handle this, we might handle it's all good. I just wanted to make sure that you were all set up in here.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I think for us is just we wanted to make sure that the monitor was available, and then if it's available, we can set it.
That's really how we're trying to keep it. I know IT is like, there's one down in L1, the auditorium down there, and this one, so those are relatively permanent. So
That's great.
yeah, it shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, no, just one.
Lights, I have no idea how to do that though. I think that's
over there. Yeah.
Oh god, you got it then.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, if you need anything else, let me know.
I will. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much.
You're Dane?
Brian.
Brian. Okay.
Brian, yes, sir.
Thank you so
Absolutely,
much.
sir. Take care, sir.
And Mr. Del Castillo, if you do the roll call, please.
Of course, Lori Blair,
You're muted. We see you.
I'm here.
Ann Bagley. There she is. You're
Ms.
muted.
Bagley, we see you. If you can wave your hand, thank you.
Ryan Barron. Thank you, Ryan. Larry Hall.
Here.
Mark Reeves.
I'm here and I have a question when we're finished with roll call, please.
And Chairwoman Hinton. Perfect.
Thank you. And I will make an announcement for members of our committee. Ms. Rangel is unfortunately no longer serving with us. She has put in her resignation, and we want to thank her for her service and certainly hope to see her back. She's been a great community advocate and look forward to having her before us again as a member of the public. So with that, we have one discussion item on our agenda today.
Madam Chair?
Oh, yes. Pardon me, Mr. Reeves, you had a question.
Yeah, just a technical format question. I do have to take a call for about 5 minutes from a doctor in the middle of this. Should I turn off my camera? Should I just, how should we do that when we're remote and we have to step away for a moment?
You could either simply step away or you might turn off your camera just as if you had left the horseshoe or left the meeting room for a few minutes, and then when you come back and are present, you would turn it back on.
Okay, perfect. That's what I'll do then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Reeves, thanks for that question. That because I sure had that same question on how to do stuff.
Yeah, because I didn't want someone to say, Mr. Reeves, you got to turn your camera on. I was like, I know, just sorry.
We will be mindful that you have to step away for a moment.
Just don't do it at the same time.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Reeves. So with that, Ms. Levy, there, I see you. Good morning. If we may ask you to read the item into the record and have our briefing, please. Oh, and I guess, sorry, I will stop you for one moment, just for members of the public who are here. I just wanted to, since this is the first time for this committee that we have had members of the public here, we're going to follow the typical order that's followed by Plan Commission, in that we will read the item into the record, have our briefing, and then as we do have speakers from the public, we will take the public comment, and then we will move to discussion by the members. And I believe we have another announcement as well.
Yes, our director, Julie Ryan, when she reads the item, would like to say something before we get into the presentations.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Ryan, for being with us this morning. So I think we're ready to read the item into the record.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Would you like me to read the item into the record?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Discussion item DCA 212003, consideration of amending temporary concrete or asphalt batching plant uses, including but not limited to concrete or asphalt batching plant and industrial uses in the Dallas Development Code, Chapter 51 and 51A.
Thank you. Ms. Ryan, you had a comment for us?
Yes, thank you. Julia Ryan, Director of Planning and Urban Design. I just wanted to provide a little background of this ordinance. And so so we had submitted an interdepartmental memo to the chair of the Environmental Committee, Councilmember Chair Blackman, on some strategies, long-term, short-term, on being able to make sure that we're looking at concrete batch plants in a strategic manner. One of those items was to review the city zoning ordinance as it relates to the location and design of this land use. And so one of the things we are talking about today is the temporary concrete batch plants. We will need to be bringing this back again to continue the conversation as it relates to the proposed changes that you may hear about today for the permanent concrete batch plants. So this will be a continuing discussion as we move forward, but you'll get a preview of what we're looking at through the presentation. But we will need to bring this back again to make sure that that is properly noticed with the permanent batch plants.
And Mr. Van Handberg, if I could ask a clarification. So for consideration, since our posted notice is specific to the temporary concrete and asphalt batch plants, that would be the only action that can be taken by this body today. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
But I think your option to get just a phase, another, there may be no action taken, they come directly.
You only mentioned concrete, but we also considering asphalt?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
All right, so with that, Ms. Levy, could we have our briefing, please?
And can everyone see the screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'm sorry. Screen was frozen. I'm sorry. Okay, so in our overview, we're going to go over just very briefly the background, history, purpose, issues, operational business concerns, staff recommendation, and then the next steps. And again, just on the background, on November 12th of last year, staff prepared a memo at the request of Councilmember Blackman, the chair of the Environment and Sustainability Committee, on strategies to effectively address our batching plants in the city. And then on January of this year, staff prepared a memo on a phasing approach to address the batch plant zoning regulations. And again, the purpose of this amendment before you is to go ahead and align basically the zoning code amendment for the concrete batch plants in support of the adopted CCAP, or Comprehensive Environmental and Climate Action Plan, with the goal of ensuring new industries are an appropriate distance away from neighborhoods. So what we want to do, we want to protect the sensitive uses such as residences, parks, and schools from these intensive land uses, improve public health and air quality, and provide appropriate locations for the batching plant operations. So some of the concerns for the temporary batching plants, as we have in our code right now under section 51A 4.20 under industrial uses, we have a specific category for temporary concrete or asphalt batching plant. And those are defined as a temporary facility for mixing cement or asphalt. However, right now they're permitted in all districts, including residential, as well as some PDs, with special authorization of the building official, meaning an administrative process, basically. And of course, there's some additional provisions such as screening and buffering that is looked at during that administrative process. So the issue is there's no public notification right now, no public hearings are required for that process. Also, concrete or asphalt batching plants under the permanent category are not listed as a potentially incompatible industrial use in the IM, or industrial manufacturing district. So because they're not listed as such, they're considered an industrial outside use and are permitted in the IM, industrial manufacturing district, with RAR, residential adjacency review required. No public hearing process, basically. So what staff is proposing, again, is a two-phased approach. And phase one is what we're putting forward today to address the urgency of this sensitive land use. And phase one, we're calling the short-term approach, is to immediately address the lack of public process for these industrial land uses by removing, again, that administrative by right approval process that's currently allowed by our code. And we're adding in a specific use permit, or SUP, process that requires the public hearings, both for City Plan Commission and City Council. And of course, in doing so, that also requires the public notifications for those hearings to occur. Phase 2, what we're proposing is development of new regulations, but a much more comprehensive approach and public input, which would take approximately 4 to 6 months. And what we want to include is review of departmental coordination, some legal considerations of implications on existing land uses, research of local and national cities regs and best practices, input from the public, industry, and professional organizations, and of course, continuing coordination with state and federal jurisdictions, meaning our TCEQ group that actually has the responsibility to also review these applications. So phase 1, again, we want to immediately add a public process for the asphalt and concrete batch plants by removing the administrative and by right approval process for those batch plants and concrete or asphalt batching plants allowed by code. Again, adding the SUP process for the public hearings, going to CPC and City Council, and adding batching and asphalt batching to the subsection with potentially incompatible industrial uses so that the concrete batching plants and the asphalt batching plants are permitted by SUP only in the IM district. Again, right now that, without that language in there, they're allowed by right in the IM district. So our recommendation is to move phase 1 to require the temporary concrete batching and asphalt plants to City Plan Commission for consideration. Moving also phase 1 to add asphalt and concrete batching plants to potentially incompatible industrial uses in IM zoning to City Plan Commission for consideration. And to continue working on phase 2 zoning ordinance for the future consideration by ZOAC. Next steps, again, we would like to take this to CPC. We anticipate bringing ZOAC's recommendation for phase 1 to CPC in March of this year while we continue to work on phase 2 recommendations. And if recommended by CPC, we anticipate forwarding to City Council for their final action approval and effective date in April of this year. If phase 1 is not approved, applications for temporary concrete and asphalt batching plants and the batching plants in IM district will continue, including in our sensitive locations without public hearings or public hearing process. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know we do have a lot of speakers, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. I think we'll hold our questions if that's acceptable to the members and hear from members of the public. Perfect. So we will start with Ms. Eckert. I apologize if I didn't get your name correct. I think she may be online. So yes, and all of our public speakers will be given 3 minutes. Which is our typical time period. And so we'll give you a notice at the end of your 3 minutes. And Ms. Eckert, if you are here, we're looking for you. We will need to have your camera on for any of our online speakers. And if you could wave your hand if you're perhaps here, we do not see you online. Yeah, we'll circle back to her. So our next speaker, Tamika Darrow. Ms. Darrow? I don't see her either. We'll circle back. Jamie Cisneros. There you are. Thank you, ma'am. Oh.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Jamie Cisneros, and I live in the Singleton United Unidos neighborhood in West Dallas, specifically 2821 Bedford Street, Dallas, Texas 75212. I'm here today to support the first phase solution of mandating the SUPs for all batch plants, both the temporary ones and the permanent ones. I appreciate the step towards a more inclusive public process. The proposed zoning changes for phase 2 are very promising, and I'm excited about the relief it's going to bring to people in our communities. As phase 2 gets more defined, I advocate for increasing the buffer between the batch plants and sensitive land uses to 1,500 feet, and phasing out existing batch plants over time, where existing facilities must come into compliance proactively by applying for those SUPs 2 years after the ordinance passes. Having these items in place will have a huge lift to public health and will show that the city of Dallas is looking out for the residents. It's also going to help improve mental health too. I mean, for example, removing anxiety and fear that settles in whenever we learn that yet again, another batch plant is trying to operate close to a public school. So I look forward to the comprehensive ordinance that proactively protects us from these all too common occurrences. And I thank you all so much for your work.
Thank you for being here today and sharing your comments. Debbie Solis. I do not see Ms. Solis online. Linda Wilkerson. Ms. Wilkerson, I see you.
I think she's unmuted.
Oh, and are you able to unmute yourself?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry. I'll be back to you, Ms. Wilkerson. Ms. Solis, thank you. I couldn't see you.
Okay, so my name is Debbie Orozco Solis. I live at 2322 Kenesar Drive, which is the Ledbetter area. I was born and raised in West Dallas. I strongly support the proposed batch plant zoning code revision. The West Dallas community has been working closely with the city staff and our District 6 City Council representative to identify solutions that would address the longstanding issues that batch plants bring to my community. There are currently 7 batch plants in operation in West Dallas. I know firsthand that concrete batch plants are terrible neighbors, from the dust clouds that linger in the air to the dirty pools of water that collect on site and in the street. Even when on paper they seemingly comply with regulations, in practice, I know that the monitoring and reporting is to address the nuisance conditions we experience. West Dallas has suffered with unfair zoning for generations, with heavy industrial like batch plants next door to schools and residential neighbors. I support the proposed batch plant amendment because it will require a SUP and input from the community through public hearings. I know Dallas is growing and batch plants are needed to support the growth, but not at the expense of the health of its citizens. It's a shame that dirty businesses are concentrated in the southern sector of Dallas. District 6 currently has more than 20 concrete batch plants. Today, I come asking you to help us stop the historical environmental racism that the city of Dallas has had in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today. Ms. Wilkerson? You're muted. Ms. Wilkerson, you're still muted.
Sorry. Thank you for allowing this public meeting. And I just want to totally support everything that Debbie Solis and Mrs. Cisneros said. I am in strong agreement with this amendment. I do believe that batch plants should have to have the specific use permit and not be allowed to just operate indefinitely under temporary permits. I also believe that both the city and the public need to have an opportunity to weigh in on batch plant applications and where they're located. And as you heard from Ms. Solis, I live in West Dallas also, in the Ledbetter area at 5427 Fanny Street. And again, working closely with the city and with our city council representative to try to improve the quality of life in West Dallas. And one of our significant issues is pollution that's created by all of the industries that are in West Dallas, particularly these batch plants. And obviously, that the batch plants are not distributed equally across the city. They're concentrated in the west and southern sections of Dallas. And we would like to have a process in place where, one, we can speak to the new applications, but also in the phase 2, there's some way to approach the plants that are already here and bring them into compliance, and hopefully even find other places for them to locate where they're not near our neighborhoods and our schools. So thank you very much. I really appreciate the work that the Zoning Commission is doing on this matter, and fully support this proposed amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkerson. Ms. Brenda Shelton. Ms. Brenda Shelton, if you're with us, if you could turn on your camera. We do not see you. Okay, we'll circle back with her. Consuelo Gonzalez. Gonzalez, excuse me. Okay, we don't. Tommy Richardson.
Yes.
Mr. Richardson,
I'd like-
you could begin with your name for the record. Thank you. Name and address.
My name is Tommy Richardson. I'd like to waive my right to speak at this time.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you for being with us. Ms. Evelyn Meyer. Evelyn Meyer?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and can you see me?
Not yet.
All right. How about now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Good morning. Thank you all so much for having this meeting this morning. My name is Evelyn Mayo, and I live at 1030 Cedar Hill Avenue, Dallas, Texas, 75208. I'm the chair of Downwinders at Risk, a local environmental justice organization. And since joining the board in 2017, we've been focused the majority of our work on particulate matter pollution. And concrete and asphalt batch plants produce a lot of particulate matter pollution. As you've heard from the previous speakers, this is an issue that's harming the quality of life and public health of residents here in Dallas, in particular in Southern Dallas. And our neighborhood coalition prepared a draft ordinance on this matter that was circulated to the Environmental Commission, Planning and Urban Design, Office of Environmental Quality, and the City Council last month. And in it, we included the request to add the SUP requirement to all temporary and permanent concrete batch plants. And this ordinance was also circulated to you all for consideration. So I echo the sentiment before me that we applaud the steps the staff is taking today with this first phase of the changes to the zoning code. Thank you for listening to the voices of frontline residents and the overwhelming scientific evidence available on this matter. In addition to the SUPs, our ordinance language includes adding this 1,500 foot buffer between any new concrete or asphalt batch plant and homes, school, childcare facilities, and other protected uses. Based on their potential impact to public health, the Dallas City Council has already approved this type of buffer in regards to waste incinerators and gas and oil drilling. Nuisances from these sources was one of the reasons for those distances being required by the council. And so residents deserve the same level of protection from batch plants, which can be a significant source of nuisance conditions, including dust and odors. Our ordinance also features a compliance schedule for existing batch plants. So 2 years after the official adoption of the ordinance, all batch plants operating for 10 years or longer in the city of Dallas will be required to apply for this SUP. Our coalition believes this is a comprehensive ordinance that deals with current and future batch plants while allowing a reasonable timeline for operators to adapt. If anything less than the 1,500 foot buffer zone won't provide the level of protection for our communities that's required in light of scientific research. Finally, I have a question regarding the residential notification and adjacency review, how it applies in the agricultural zoning district, because right now ag zoning and industrial zoning can be next to each other compared to residential zoning and industrial zoning. And I don't believe that the residential adjacency review process is triggered for homes in ag districts, despite them being residential properties. So we really look forward to phase 2 and providing substantive public input in the process. So thank you all again.
Thank you for being with us today. Excuse me. Chris Bowers, Mr. Bowers.
Good morning, Chris Bowers, 1316 Village Creek Drive, Plano, Texas. I'm here representing GAF Corporation. We do object to some of the comments and disagree with some of the comments made by a couple of members of the public to the extent that they are attacking the permanent asphalt materials products manufacturing. But since there was an announcement at the start of this meeting that ZOAC today will only consider regulations of the temporary batch plants, we will withhold our comments at this time.
Thank you for being with us. Mr. Brendan Morgan.
This meeting, yeah, I would withhold my comments.
Thank you for being with us today. And our last speaker, Catherine Bazan. Ms. Bazan, thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, and if you could start with your name and address, please.
Catherine Bazan, 10456 Vinemont Street. This opportunity for public input is so valuable to our residents, and we thank you for lending your expertise in service to this community and for hearing these community members today. The city acknowledges that in considering impactful changes like the proposed zoning code amendment, our residents should have a voice in creating this inclusive process for them to be heard. And that's exactly why we are supporting the proposed amendment, because in the 14 years that I've been working to improve air quality and environmental quality, providing I'll be there in just a second. I'm so sorry. That's why we're supporting the proposed amendment, because in the 14 years that I've been providing regulatory compliance assistance to batching facilities and supporting grassroots voices to protect our neighborhoods, I have yet to identify another more urgently needed policy reform than this one. The current policy prioritizes a single company's land rights over hundreds of neighbors' rights to enjoy their properties. It denies our diligent staff the opportunity to review these projects. It denies our capable city plan commissioners the opportunity to vet them, and it silences our elected officials' voices and the voices of those that they were elected to represent. The Texas Commission on Environmental Quality does not guarantee a public hearing for concrete batch plants. And in fact, no matter how many citizen requests are received, they often won't grant one until we have a legislator do so on our behalf. And even when granted, they never fail to issue the requested permits. And our voices are heard, but they are not considered. Batch plants provide concrete for anything designated for a public project, aren't required to even notify the public. The TCQ also does not consider proximity to co-located facilities or other emission sources. They don't consider environmental justice or equity. They don't consider how placing an industrial facility in a neighborhood perpetually changes the desirability and value of those homes. And they cannot understand the unique challenges of our communities, their histories, or their unique character. Only our staff, our commissioners, our council, and our community members can evaluate these projects with the thoughtful consideration our communities deserve. As an advocate, I can tell you that fighting this industrial encroachment issue is exhausting on so many levels, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. It is hard, and these are people who have families, who have jobs, sometimes 2 jobs, and they have better things to do, but they can't not want better air for their communities and better places for their families. And so that's not the quality of life that neighbors in other parts of the city enjoy, but that West and South Dallas must face almost weekly and monthly sometimes. So we appreciate staff's holistic review of this issue and the solution. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And for members of the commission, we have received some written comments from members of the public that Mr. De Castillo will send to those online electronically. He's distributing them to those in person here, that you will, hopefully everyone will have email access and you can take a look at those as we're going through this. So thank you to all of our speakers. I'm going to go through a few who we weren't able to reach in case they are now online. Anna Eckerd, Tamika Darrow, Brenda Brenda Shelton, and Consuelo Gonzalez. So thank you. So with that, I will open it up to our members for questions for staff.
Madam Chair, I have a question. Yeah, typically, how many temporary batch plants do we find in the city at a time? Does anybody know, have a handle on that?
Yes. We have approximately 39. We have in the last 10 years to date about 39. However, those are not all active. So we do not have, those were applications that we have some data on. However, we're still working on, apparently in the cities, cleaning up data and making sure that it is accurate. And so until they're able to go and physically on the ground, which they're in the process of doing, checking the data to see which ones are still active, we really don't have that number and really don't want to put that number out until we know for sure they can be verified.
Now, over the past 10 years, 39 temporary permits were issued. Is that what you said?
Not necessarily all issued. Those are the applications that we've had. Most have been issued, from what I can see. But again, I don't want, because we're still trying to reconcile data within the city. I'm told the data it's still not quite cleaned up enough to give an accurate number. But yeah, approximately 39 have applied within, past 10 years or so.
Can you tell, who is the building official that would issue the temporary permits? Your document that you sent us kept using the phrase building official. Who or what is that?
I believe we should have someone on the line from SDC that may want to speak on that.
Ms. May, are you with us this morning?
Sarah?
Good morning.
Good morning. How are y'all doing?
Very well.
Okay, so when the code says the building official, it's normally, y'all can hear me okay still?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I think it was just Lori's internet. I was like, uh-oh. So when the code says building official, it normally means the building official's representative. So it's anyone at building inspection, like staff, that's authorized to do it. But in this particular case, where it says special authorization by the building official will designate someone to do it. And currently it's the assistant building official, Megan Weimer, who's the assistant building official over zoning at BI. So she's been doing the final sign-offs on the concrete batch plans. I don't know for how long, maybe 6 months, a year. And before then, I believe staff was just verifying that, all the proper things were in order.
Okay.
I don't know if y'all are able to hear that.
Yeah.
I think we did.
Okay.
Thank you.
And who would issue a special use permit?
Oh, that would go through the zoning change process where it's not changing the zoning, but it would go through CPC council. And then once they obtain their SUP, then they may apply for a certificate of occupancy.
So a more rigorous process of
right.
review,
So
input and so forth. And so, okay.
Right. So when an SUP is required, it requires public hearings.
Yeah, Ms. Libby, could you just do a really quick overview of the SUP process for those who may not be familiar with it?
I guess I can answer that. I think Sarah left. Yes, basically they would apply in the, for a zone, just like any other zoning change. They would make application with the zoning team. And then, that would be reviewed by staff. And then they would you know, and once the application and all the materials were in order, you know, with the site plan review, staff would review it, make comments. They would schedule it for a public hearing and bring it before, you know, obviously public notification process. And then they would take that item onto City Plan Commission. City Plan Commission would, you know, make their recommendation one way or another, and then ultimately they would take that recommendation on to the City Council for City Council's review, and City Council would have final action authority to approve or not approve, or approve with conditions. And yes, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, and at both City Plan Commission and at City Council, there would be the opportunity for public comment, just like this body.
Absolutely, yes. There would be full public hearings with the public involved. There'd be, you know, public notification for the meetings with the protocols for public input.
Thank you. I think Mr. Van Emmer has a comment.
Bert Benford, Assistant City Attorney. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to have a little more specificity to the question, or to the answer to the question. The SUPs are evaluated for certain standards by City Council and by the City Planning Commission. The City Council will not grant an SUP for use, except upon the finding that the use will complement or be compatible with the surrounding uses and community facilities, contribute to, enhance, or promote the welfare of the area of request and adjacent properties, not be detrimental to the public health, safety, or general welfare, and conform to all other respects to all zoning regulations and standards. And that's what the City Council and CPC will look at.
Very helpful.
Do you have other questions?
Oh, I do. Just can I keep going?
Well, I was going to say, do we have any other? And
I had a follow-up to Mr. Hall's question about, can you define,
Mr. Reeves, say that again. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and what is temporary? Is it 2 months? Is it 2 years? Or some of these 39 potentially have been temporary for 10 years? What's the term?
Well, temporary as per the code is 6 months. However, if the project is not completed, they can ask for an additional time, and the building official can extend that time frame until completion of the project, basically.
So do we have any temp ones that have been around for 4 or 5 years?
Again, I'm thinking it could be possible. However, until we get that data, the data sets cleaned up and worked out, there's, you know, we really don't have great data. So, you know, until they're able to reconcile that and go out in the field and verify what is still active and what is not, I really couldn't give you a number or specify for sure. They're still working through that, so we will get that information.
Okay.
I have a question.
Ms. Blair.
Commissioner Blair.
So, yes, and following along the same lines of Mr. Reeves' question, if we find that the main purpose of a batch plan has extended their period of definition of temporary and have moved to more of a permanent position, if at that time, through this process, would they be required to immediately close down, or would they be allowed to continue their activities?
I think that's something that we will be looking at as part of phase 2, certainly. And, you know, to answer your question, I'm not sure. You know, we'll look at different options out there as far as, you know, whether they have to apply, you know, to the board for an exception, for an extension. There's so many options that we could look at. We'll have to see what's right for Dallas. And that's kind of probably maybe a legal question as well, as far as whether or not they would still be operating.
Well, can I continue with?
Commissioner Blair, and then Mr. Barron will come to you.
If we find that they have changed their definition from temporary to a more permanent definition, are we in the position with a phase one recommendation then to amend their type of their definition of what they're doing and ask them to cease because their definition of temporary is they're actually operating in I would think in violation of what their definition of use is. So if would that then not be something that would be a code violation and it would follow that process?
Well, what I can say is for the phase one approach being the SUP process, the SUP would potentially have an expiration date. So, you know, and if they go beyond their expiration date per the SUP, then, you know, however we're handling the SUP expirations now, I would say we would follow suit with that. And I think that's on a complaint basis, but again, that's something else that we will need to look at. But to answer your question, it would, an SUP, if it's, would potentially have an expiration date that may or may not be eligible for an auto renewal.
So if I may ask a clarification from Mr. Van SUPs typically include a period, is that correct?
Madam Chair, Board members, the attorney, yes, SUPs are for a finite period of time, though some do have auto renewals, and there are the occasional ones, usually much older ones that are permanent. And as to particular cases, as Commissioner Blair was asking about, we would have to look at each of those on a case by case. I don't know the facts of all those out there, but an SUP does have an expiration date.
And so the renewal, if it were in fact something happened with the project, they needed to go beyond whatever the period, they would then, presuming it was not granted as an automatic, would then come back to Plan Commission, allow for public input in this, the process that is followed by all other SUPs. Is that correct? Okay. Commissioner Blair, did I speak clearly enough for all that? Okay. Mr. Barron.
Yes, you did. Thank you so very much.
It's good clarifications. I think that's a lot of questions we're having. Mr. Barron.
Yes, great comments, and it spurred a number of questions for me. I'm assuming most of these have to do with highway construction, which, as we know, can be a 4 or 5 up to 10-year process. So it sounds like the applicant in general is a private company that is a contractor to TxDOT. So one question I would have is, does TxDOT have any accountability in this? Secondly, I think given the fact that, assuming my assumption is accurate, if these are 5 to 10-year highway projects, then I think it's critical for this to have any value, and perhaps this is outside of the purview of ZOAC, for us to look at the term length of what's considered temporary. Is that fair that these are serving highway projects, or is that something we can understand?
If I may, that's a very good and valid point. And I think that's something, again, we'll be looking at more as part of phase 2. I have seen at least one city that does have a temporary batch plant process and how they are regulated differently for any road and highway project. I think it's my understanding right now that even the ones for TxDOT do apply, through our process with, our current process for temporary batch plans.
Then they would, under a 6-month window, then they're applying for what, 10 review periods or something? I mean, that seems, what is the renewal process? Is that an easy process?
If I may, I would like to have Sarah May answer that, since that's really the building process. Sarah.
Ms. May, thank you for being with us.
Sure. Thank you, everybody. Sarah May from Building Inspection. Yes, just like what Mr. Bering said, the vast majority of our temporary concrete batch plants are applied for public works projects, because the whole purpose of a temporary concrete batch plants is to create a site that has movable equipment that has the ability to batch concrete together so they can get it to a large scale concrete, civil works project in the vicinity. So they are often City of Dallas, TxDOT projects that are using the temporary concrete batch plants. We do have some individual operators that want to do it permanently, and that's when the role of the building official comes in and says, hey, this is a temporary use. You can only get a CO for a 6-month period, and every 6 months you have to come back in and you have to reapply. And in that 6 months, if the neighbor has a problem, they can call 311, get building inspection out there to inspect, see what the problem is. Part of our review is to ask, where are the trucks going? What roads are you using to get to that project? So if we have a whole lot of 311 complaints and the district office is involved, which they often do get involved, to help get that contractor back in line, then the building official is going to know about it. And so as they're reapplying for these things, it kind of becomes a conversation in a little rope for the building inspection office to help, solve some of those issues. But I hope that helps explain kind of the process. I think the maximum period is 3 years in the code. But we do have some very large TxDOT projects. Like if you think about the 635 dig that happened, that took a really long time. And, they may have even had multiple temporary concrete batch plants because it was just so large. And that's just, people, if you've got to pour a driveway somewhere, you're not going to build a temporary concrete batch plant site for that. It's going to be this giant civil works project that those get constructed for.
So, Ms. May, if I may have a follow-up on that. As we are evaluating the SUP, would that then potentially, having the site plan would be part of it? A lot of the items that you just reviewed about screening, truck maneuvering, all of those items would be part of what would be evaluated in the SUP process in light of the SUP conditions that we're charged with evaluating for any SUP. Is that correct?
That's right. And it's something that the building official is also looking at. Do they have any screening? Where are their entrances? Where are they going to? And things like that. But you are correct in that I'm sure the SUP process will do a great job of hashing out all those factors.
Okay, so I see Ms. Bagley, but Mr. Bering, did we answer your question?
Enough for now. Thank you.
Thank you. So Ms. Bagley, and then we'll go to second round.
Good morning. All I can say is it's about time that we've done this, and I thank you for a very good presentation and for the public comments that we got. I am always concerned about the automatic renewals. I would like to see great care given into that. I'd like to see the distances from residences and schools be
Yes.
And then the other thing is that I worked on the oil and gas ordinance way back, and we looked at the destruction of the streets for the heavy equipment going up and down public streets and the damage that's sometimes done with the heavy equipment. And sometimes I think we required them to video the road prior to the oil and gas facility going in, and then whatever needed to be restored at a future date. So some things of those may work into the permanent or phase 2, but I think those need to be considered. And thank you very much.
So, Ms. Bagley, we caught the last half of that. We have some our computer cut off for the video and is back. So just to make sure we caught that for the record, might I ask you to restate your comments?
Yeah, well, I'll try to remember them. So, okay, one, it's about time. We looked at these areas. I very much appreciated the staff report and the presentation today, as well as the public comments. I'm not a big fan of automatic renewals, so I think there needs to be a process there that carefully considers them in relationship to public schools, neighborhoods, etc. I also am concerned about the conditions that heavy equipment, when you move it up and down streets, and concrete trucks are probably rather heavy, as to the conditions of the public roads in and out of a temporary or permanent facility. When I worked on the oil and gas ordinance way back, we required, I think, and I don't know if it ever really totally went into effect, but we required videoing of the roads in and out of the facility, both before and after the oil and gas rig would be there. So I think you've got to think about how heavy these concrete trucks are and what damage they can do to public facilities in and out of it. But that's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're going to go to second round, Mr. Hall. I think you had some additional comments.
I'll just throw a few things out. My understanding is these temporary batch plants are set up when you need more than a certain amount of concrete per month, 10,000 cubic yards or something like that. And so they would be for bigger projects. And I think Legacy West development up there had a temporary batch plant. But a lot of the construction doesn't need that kind of concrete, so they're just going to be driving trucks in. Concrete has to be poured within 90 minutes of being mixed, so there's time factors and things like that. Yeah, I guess I'm just a bit concerned that we don't have a handle on the number of batch plants. Do we know how many permanent batch plants there are?
I think, will that come as part of phase 2?
Yeah.
Ms. Levy, is that when we'll have that? You guys are building the data set and that'll come back?
Yes, I think, we definitely want to confirm and make sure the data is accurate before we put it out.
Yeah.
But yes.
I think we had a member of the public that mentioned 20 plants in West Dallas. So it seems like there's quite a few out there. Okay. And just one final thing, in your material you sent us, it said due to the proliferation of concrete and asphaltine batch plants, particularly within locations that cause concerns such as residential adjacency issues, equitable justice, air quality, water quality, and potentially hazardous pollutant emissions, staff is considering this two-phase approach. And I think we've heard from the public. The public is very concerned about all of those things too. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. And I would like to acknowledge that Commissioner Carpenter is with us as well. Thank you for joining us this morning. If I may, I wanted to follow up on two questions that we had on the SUP in the discussion we've just had about the existing temporary batch plants. Could you speak to how those will be evaluated if they reach the end of their current period? Do they, when they reapply, if this moves forward and is approved, do they then reapply through the SUP process for any renewals? Now, I don't know if that may be a Ms. May question or Ms. Levy.
I believe if an SUP has expired, they do just.
The question is,
just-
the question is if it's an existing temporary, they have an existing temporary concrete batch plant permit. They're at the end of their 6 months. They would have to go to building inspection for a renewal for that, or an extension, I think it was the terminology. If the SUP process is then in place, do they then get directed through that process?
I'd say that as long as they are within the scope of their original certificate of occupancy that was issued, you know, assuming they haven't expanded to the lot next door or something like that, we would view it, as long as they come in before it expires, we would probably view it as a renewal and an extension of that original use and consider it a non-conforming use if the code has changed at that time to require an SUP.
And so then for the current code, that would mean that it would be a 3-year maximum for the temporary use.
Right.
So essentially, I think if I'm doing my math, 5 renewals would be the maximum. Okay, I expect we may have some further discussion on that point, but thank you for that information. Mr. Reeves.
Yes, talk to me about the current residential adjacency review and the buffer. What's the current process? Just curious.
I think that probably is for me. This is Sarah May from Building Inspection. There's not really a process because it's allowed in every district by special authorization of the building official. So the building official would get their application, their site plan. They'd want to see if it's graved or paved, if it's crushed concrete, you know, that they're driving on, where they're getting on the roads, if there's any fencing, if they have adequate parking on site. And they would probably look in an aerial view or Google Maps to see what's around it and the route that they're planning on taking. And they would just consider it, you know, as if a planner was looking at it, because Megan's background is also planning.
So there literally could be a school or a house directly across the highway or a street or whatnot, and there is no residential adjacency review because of that use right there in today's code.
Well, currently residential adjacency review is still an administrative review that just, you know, again, looks at the aerial view, looks at what's around it, and tries to add in any reasonable conditions to make that use more suitable for the neighbors, you know, residential or not, that are around it. So, I mean, we are doing a residential adjacency review. It's just not called that.
Okay, so phase 2 of this, and I know we're not there today, but just getting my head around it, we may look at a buffer, like, okay, you're within, just like we do alcohol around a school or something like that.
Right. It's not since it's not defined in the code, we don't have a defined limit of how far out we're looking. But we generally use our experience and, you know,
okay. And
how far to go.
One follow-up question about buffer with the city attorney, Mr. Burt. Could buffer be a part of the SUP language? So, like, if it wasn't near 1,500 feet from any of those residential uses or a school or daycare or anything like that, then we don't have to do an SUP. But if it is within that, then we do the SUP. Or is the SUP standard, it is what it is, we have to consider it underneath those legal terms?
Madam Chair, Adjacency Attorney, if I understand the commissioner's question.
Former commissioner.
Yeah, you're always a commissioner. There are other SUPs that have spacing requirements. Group homes, you know, they're allowed in unless they're within a certain distance from each other. They need to get an SUP. Something we can certainly look at to make some sort of allowance for that.
And so that would be spacing.
It would technically be spacing.
And I think one more question for the attorney. Ms. May had answered about, or to the Madam Chair's excellent question about if someone's their 6-month permit does run out, I think we need today to understand what is the process. If we're going to say an SUP, are they going to have to come back and get an SUP, or will they go to build an admin right if they've already gone that route? I think we need to determine that today, don't we? Yes, Sarah, go ahead.
Well,
So, since I heard in the conversation earlier, how many SUP or how many COs do we have issued for temporary concrete batch plants? I did a search for the past 2 years, and we only have 3 different sites that have a CO for a temporary concrete batch plant in the city. So, and that's the past 2 years. It may have wrapped up since then, but as you know, like it's only valid for a maximum of 3 years. I guess I can go back 3 years, but we're only talking about a handful of sites that have a CO right now.
That's good to know too. But to be fair to those 3, I think we should know what the process is for them.
agreed. And Mr. Van
And Madam Chair, the legal department would really like to look at it. I can't tell you exactly. I'd have to read what the temporary requirements are and how it's going to translate into a second SUP based upon what Sarah said. I have some questions for building inspection before I answer.
So I have a follow-up, if I may, Commissioner Blair. I want to ask Ms. May a question, and then I'll come to you. So, Ms. May, in light of the discussion on the residential adjacency review, what are the criteria, or I guess maybe another way to say this, is there criteria under which an application would be denied?
There's no defined criteria in which it would be denied. So I guess maybe the answer would be staff works really hard with these applicants to make sure that, one, we're issuing the CO for the right land use. And we do give them lots of opportunities to present a better plan, instead of I'm going to be running, down this residential street, I'm going to actually be coming in this direction on the commercial street. So if something looks completely unreasonable, which I don't know what that would be, most of these are near highways, then I'm sure there is the ability to deny them, but I haven't seen one yet that we have denied that I can think of.
I guess based on some of the comments that we've received today, it seems like there might be an opportunity. So it would be helpful, I think, to understand what that criteria is in more detail, and that may help us inform how we might think of any future provisions as well.
Yes.
Commissioner Blair.
I think I have a couple of questions for Ms. May. The first one, she said there's only 3 COs for temporary batch plants today. Is that correct? In the last that have for the last 2 years. Is there a process in which when a CO expires, BI actually goes out to verify they've closed down? That's number 1.
Okay. I would probably need to talk to the district office, people, to see if they go out and make sure that the site is clear. But, when their temporary concrete batch plant CO has expired, they need to remove all of the crushed concrete they put out there. They got to remove all the fencing. They got to remove all the equipment that was used out there, or else it's an illegal land use. They're still operating the temporary concrete batch plant without a valid CO.
Then to follow up with that, is there a requirement to verify that they have put the land back into the condition it was before they came in, so that they environmentally clean up the damages that they do to the land that they've used?
Yes, I mean, I would say they need to remove every,
I think we lost her we lost her.
We did. We lost her. I think she saw it coming too. So
maybe someone, maybe the gods didn't want her to answer that question.
Well, we will certainly make sure we have that return. I would think, I don't know, Ms. Levy, if you're able to speak to that, or if you are able to.
Yeah, I mean, I have, I've looked at what's in the code right now. I just can't speak to,
How they verify it.
who goes out and checks. That part I don't know. I do know that, in the code right now, they do have to clear the site of the equipment, material, and debris, and operate in a manner which eliminates dust, noise, and odor.
Miss May is back if she wanted to finish her thought.
Yeah, but it is vague. I mean, that's
computer
pretty much
died.
the criteria. Hi, Sarah. Yeah, I was just
Hi, I'm
speaking
sorry
to
about
what's actually in the code as far as what it says, that they have to, clear the site of material and debris upon completion. So we do have that in the code. There's very limited language though. So I just can't speak to what we actually do to check.
I'm sorry. That would explain where my brain and memory was like, yeah, they have to remove everything. Because it's in the code.
But do they have to clean up the land and environmentally return the land to the condition it was before they began their batch plant?
It all depends on what you think that means. I mean, are you saying like if they had to do tree mitigation to remove some trees beforehand, do they have to plant the trees again? No, because they did tree mitigation.
No. What I'm saying is what we find is that in district, and I'm gonna speak specifically to District 8, and I'm sure Ms. Carpenter, Commissioner Carpenter will co-sign what I'm asking. What we find is that they come in, they environmentally destroy the land in order to do the work they need to do to create in the batch plant. Once they've done that, they walk away and the land is unsuitable for anything else now but IM. So if they come into a residential or a more environmentally friendly zoned plat of land, they do their work, that plat of land is now left to the city to reform it, to bring it back to whatever, or the next applicant to come in and clean up the land, and which is unfair. Is there a process that says that temporary batch plant, and this is for phase 1, and I think it needs to be handled in phase 1 and move to phase 2. But is there anything that says that user must return the land back to the standards it was before they began? So which means they would need to possibly do an environmental study to see what is the grade of the land, and an environmental study at the end of the use to say what it is that land must be returned to, and then they must be the one who is financially responsible for the return of the land to what it was environmentally before they began. Is there a process for that?
Commissioner Blair, I think that's an excellent point. I don't see that language anywhere in the current, restrictions or under temporary concrete or batching plants. That is something that could certainly be expressed as part of the SUP process, and I would think put as a condition, as well as a myriad of others, to ensure that happens. And so that would be part of phase 1 with the SUP process, where they could, certainly you would be able to, or CPC, the city council could put those conditions in.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Bagley?
Yeah, Okay. You get a SUP for a temporary batch plant for 6 months, but you can renew it 5 times, so you could have this temporary batch plant there for 3 years. That's not temporary very temporary at that point. I think there needs to be a little different look at what maybe it's done on that. And as far as the environmental concerns, and I don't know where it stands right now, but the oil and gas ordinance had some requirements for restoring sites. So you might look at that.
Thank you, Ms. Bagley. I'm trying to, Commissioner Carpenter, as you're with us today, are there any questions that you wanted to ask for our discussion today?
Yes, I do, about the the residential adjacency review. Right now, it sounds as if there's never a way for the building official to say, I mean, they can make suggestions, but they don't ultimately have the power to decline one of these temporary batch plant applications. Is that correct?
No, that's not true. We can deny it. I just want to say that for there. It's subject to the building official's authorization. So the building official can deny it. And I would imagine the building official would deny it, especially if there are some public concerns in the neighborhood, or if something is, extenuating. Like, I think that there would be a lot of discussion and ability, and there's a lot of room for the building official to say no if needed.
But given that there's no public process right now to take input, how would the building official know what the concerns are? Because one of my issues with batch plants, both permanent and temporary through the years, has been the way residential adjacency is defined. It's by zoning, it's not by use. You can have residential homes sitting on all sorts of zoning. Happens very frequently in the southern sector, the western sector, where you've had industrial and hodgepodge through the years, and you end up with homes there. And so a home that has been there, maybe much longer than the industrial use, has no rights under current residential adjacency review because it's totally key to zoning.
Yeah, and what you're talking about are kind of two different things. So the residential adjacency review is something that specific uses are required to go through when they're within 330 feet of a residential or a private property in a residential district. But this
point. It's residential zoning. It's not the residential use.
Right. Exactly. I just wanted to point out that that's different than by special authorization of the building.
Okay. And I know KCEQ requirements now stipulate a certain distance from residential zoning and residential uses. They don't draw that distinction. So it gives a little bit more protection to some of these. And right now, the residential adjacency review, I know in the material that was sent out for the meeting today, it said that the building official, I believe it said the building official has to approve the application for a temporary batch plant if certain criteria for screening and buffering are met. And I think that can just be a certain amount of fencing and perhaps some planting zone. I just want to say that's just grossly inadequate for the reality of batch plants, because the noise, the particulate matter, it's just, part of the problem is the way the use is defined, that it's not defined as being a potentially incompatible use. So perhaps that will be improved by changing the classification, the category that this falls under.
And also want to just point out again, temporary concrete batch plant is different than the permanent concrete batch plant.
Right.
So the ones that do kind of have a lot more cross-town traffic, because the temporary batch plant is typically for large public works projects. They're not for jobs all around the city. They're for a specific job. And if y'all remember some of our larger public works projects, they take longer than 3 years usually. So to Ms. Bagley's comment earlier, but they're two different things, and y'all are welcome to open it up as far as you want.
But did a temporary batch plant just get approved in West Dallas near a school for a non-public works project? Isn't it for a private warehouse project?
I looked up all of our temporary batch plants since 2020. We have one on Walton Walker, Adetla, California Crossing, Riverfront, and Luna Road.
Okay, my understanding is that one has just gotten approved on Singleton near the elementary school over there for a big warehouse project at Norwich and Singleton.
And it may have. I just don't. I'm only looking at the ones that are coded as temporary concrete batch plants.
I guess I'm still a little confused as to how the SUP process is going to be applied retroactively to these temporary plants that go on beyond what most of us would think of as temporary, that potentially can go on for 3 years and come in for renewal every 6 months. If the city does impose an SUP requirement on these, will they then at some renewal period have to join the process? Or if not, if they're deemed incompatible, non-conforming uses, then can the neighborhood go through the Board of Adjustment process to shut these down if they're a nuisance?
Commissioner Carpenter, if I may, I think, that's going to depend on the effective date that, ultimately gets determined by City Council in their final action authority. I think the intent right now is to start at the effective date, any new ones coming in. I think phase 2, however, will make, that's what we're going to need to look at a lot more comprehensively, how the existing ones could be impacted, and if how we want to handle that going forward. But I think, as far as phase 1, it's to put it in place at effective date going forward for any new applications coming in.
Just a general comment I'd like to make about the process as a whole for SUPs when they get to the end of their life. There really needs to be improvement as to the way that building inspection, code compliance, whatever legal deals with these, because I know we've had situations here in West Dallas where we have had, because right now if you grant someone an SUP and it has an end date, you can't give them, going through the permanent process, if you give them an SUP for 2 years, say even with no auto renewal, even if the intention was clearly expressed to them that they were supposed to relocate during that period of time, they have the right legally to reapply. And right now, code, backs off if they are, quote unquote, attempting to get legal. And even though, the community, everyone knew that the intention was for them to leave, it has taken as long as 18, 19 months to shut down, a concrete batch plant even after their SUP expired. And right now also, what I get from code is they don't have easy access to SUP conditions, SUP site plans, or deed restrictions on properties. There needs to be a better mechanism for those people who are tasked with enforcing these things to have access to what they need to do this enforcement.
Excellent points.
But that's enough for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carpenter. I do have one follow-up, Ms. May, for you. It was a question from our public speakers today. Commissioner Carpenter's comments reminded me of regarding residential use in an agricultural district. Does that trigger a residential adjacency review?
Per the residential adjacency review requirements, the agricultural district is not included in the list of residential districts that would trigger a residential.
And so because it's zoning, not use, is that the distinction?
And it's even private property within residential zoning. Because if it's a public park or something dedicated, or a railway, or something that's within that residential district that's dedicated to public use, it does not trigger the residential adjacency review. We'd have to go to private property in residential districts, is what the residential adjacency review items say.
So, Ms. Levy, is that one of the items that you all are investigating as part of phase 2?
We will, Commissioner, Madam Chair, we will be looking at all of that, residential adjacency with respect to distances, appropriate locations, all of these factors. However, that is one thing that we are addressing right now as part of phase 1, is to have an SUP on included for the agricultural districts for that temporary concrete batching plant. Currently, as it's written, it's actually allowed by right, not even approval of the building official as it's written in the code. So that is being taken out. We're adding SUP language so that an SUP will be required for that use in the agricultural district.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. May. So, Mr. Hall,
Just one thing, I've not heard the mention of an asphalt batching plant. Or have there not been any permits issued for asphalt plants?
I'm sorry, they are coded as the same thing in it's concrete, asphalt, or temporary concrete or asphalt batching plant. They're lumped together. There's no distinction in our.
It's just the same. Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
it just,
Okay.
it's the same in terms of how the city would process it. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
So any final questions from our members, commissioners? Mr. Reeves, I saw your light.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. So there was a number of questions and discussions. I think some items that may need. I'm trying to determine if we would like to have these questions come back to us. My working list of items that I have noted from today's discussion was to review buffer or spacing language, similar to that is included in group homes. Environmental study at the end of the period, which could be referenced from the current oil and gas provisions. Considerations of the period and how that might be related to the current temporary 6 month with the maximum of 3 years. Consideration of the impact of public infrastructure and how that might be considered. And then to have a response on the transition from the existing temporary allowed use to the SUP process. Did I capture everyone's major comments? So is the will of the group to have this come back before us for a final briefing before a recommendation?
Madam Chair, this is Mark Reeves. I think I'm okay with sending this on. The buffer, I mean, given that there's a phase 2 with those timelines. Now, if those timelines for phase 2 go out 2 years, then I'd be singing a different tune. But other than like, how would we handle those that actually do expire, and the city attorney ought to be able to get that answer before CPC, I would think. We're not talking 200 of these things. We're talking very minimal. And, we could have some guidelines. I know if I was a commissioner and I was looking at this, and I would take in my mind that buffer anyway, if this was an SUP coming before me. So given that there's some guidelines to this, I'm personally okay with recommending this go on. That's just my opinion.
Yes, ma'am.
If I may, we will be returning this back to this committee just because we were not able to discuss the permanent concrete batch plant, asphalt batch plant.
As a part of phase 2.
As a part of phase 1.
As a part of phase 1. So we will be coming back. So our questions have been answered. So
There we go.
ask
Make it easy.
clarifications as a part of that. So thank you for that, Mr. Ryan. So with that, I guess, do we need to simply formally ask staff to address these on our next briefing? And Would you like me to restate those for the record, or do we have those? Okay. So any final thoughts? I think that may be the end of our discussion on this. We will have it come back before ZOAC for an additional briefing, and then including the additional information as referenced by Ms. Ryan. Director Ryan, pardon me. So seeing no lights or hands, we'll close our discussion on this item for today. And our final item on the agenda is the approval of our minutes. And they are the approval of the minutes as revised. Do I have a motion? Thank you, Mr. Hall. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Blair. So there's a motion and a second approval of the meeting minutes from December 16th, 2021 as revised. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So minutes are adopted. And I don't believe we have any additional business today. So with that, thank you for members and commissioners for being here today, staff for your time, excellent presentation and information. And it is 10:26 and the meeting of the Zoning Ordinance Advisory Committee is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.